This is a Clouds weather alert.
Meteorologist Casey Cloud live with you here. It is late Tuesday, early Wednesday update. We're tracking Hurricane Melissa still, I know, destroyed, decimated Jamaica. We don't have the full scope of the damage reports yet, but just a terrible tragedy there for a lot of folks. Some areas, eastern side didn't get the impacts near as much as other parts of Jamaica, though. So if you see images, reports of it not being too bad, well, part of Jamaica did get spared, a good bit, but a lot of Jamaica got it, very, very severely, the impacts there from Melissa. But you see it approaching here, that landfall now in Cuba, the Category 3 hurricane, the latest update, 2 a.m. Eastern Time, update here, Eastern time there in the U.S., update here, using that daylight time. We did have that maximum sustained wind speed indicated to be around 125 miles an hour, but there could be some higher gusts still. I know Guantanamo Bay here in Cuba, those conditions deteriorating there. Some of you guys have maybe interest in that, with that being, something here to do with the United States military. So, again, something to kind of take note there as we're looking at, as we're tracking things here. This is Eastern Cuba being hit by a Cat 3, not a historic Cat 5 in terms of just all-time record numbers, but still, this is a historic storm, and it's continuing to have its impact be felt here in, some of these different areas there toward the Caribbean, and then ultimately, we'll be looking up toward the Bahamas there. We even maybe looking at Bermuda later on now, it would seem, as there's a hurricane watch there for some of those areas as we're looking further on up. So again, definitely something to be very mindful of here as we're looking at things, as we're tracking them here, as we give you guys the very latest here on all of this. So just trying to keep you guys up to date on this very terrible situation here the best we can. I know this is also a formal update. We're still keeping the logo red. We turned it red here because of what was going on there early Monday. We were getting really concerned about, that storm off of Mexico Beach there in the Florida Panhandle. I know the overall pattern, kind of seeing some different enhancements, down toward Central Florida Sunday night. Some areas getting over 18 inches of rain based on some indications from the Weather Service in Melbourne, talking about Lake County especially, but Brevard County having big flooding problems too. And then Monday morning we had that tornado situation arise there as we were looking toward the Florida Panhandle, really the worst of that stayed out of our area. But we did have an EF1 tornado there in toward the Mexico Beach area, confirmed by Storm Survey there on that Tuesday, the survey confirming that. It was on Monday morning that we were covering this here live for you on the air. Well, giving you that heads up, ended up being an EF1, not technically what you'd call a strong tornado, but it was not far off of it. And there were even reports of 10 injuries there. I know we had the RV park there be impacted. So definitely a very serious situation there toward Mexico Beach there as we were looking there Monday morning, just, we were tracking that here for you. We didn't really have, too many other issues here in the local region. That was technically outside of our covered area, but it was tracking toward our zone. We had that flooding Sunday night in Central Florida, but that also was really, staying outside of our covered area as we were looking and as we were tracking things here at the overall meteorology. So just kind of interesting here to take note of all that as we give you guys the very latest on everything. Just important to kind of be, mindful of everything going on here with the overall weather picture. So, again, just trying to make sure we're staying on top of all that here in terms of the details. I know, just in terms of those injuries there, it's a situation where that's, what was noted here. But those were minor injuries reported at the RV park, a number of minor injuries. So that's kind of, the storyline there as we were looking at things. That obviously could have been worse in that regard based on some of the Doppler wind indications when I was offshore, still in a waterspout with winds maybe as high as 150 miles an hour, but still a problematic situation there around 6:30 a.m. Central Time on that Monday morning out there on the 27th out there toward the Florida Panhandle. Around the time of Mexico Beach again, we talked about with Michael and all the problems they had there in the wake of that. And then we have another historic hurricane hit in the basin now in the form of course, Melissa. So, we're just continuing to track all this here for you, giving you guys the very latest on the overall scenario. But let me go ahead and take you to a more regional look at the southeast here. I'm going to go ahead and switch sources right now, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about here. As again, of course, we're always, wanting to look at some of these different wind speeds and the like here. Winds to 100 with that tornado. We had another tornado in that area. There's only have 0. But as you see here, our view, you do have another boundary. That's going to be, a front here bringing even cooler air, kind of that reinforcing shot. It was kind of, murky there on that Tuesday toward North Central Florida. 60s, those temperatures, cloudy out there. And the like. Well, we're going to have this boundary come through, maybe some shower, maybe it's not out of the question in my assessment. Maybe we get a quick, little thunderstorm here or there. Not expecting severe weather. Not expecting severe weather here locally on that Wednesday. Up to the north, there could be a little bit of that toward the Outer Banks of North Carolina and into Virginia. I know just with the overall pattern, we've had some more home issues there toward the Outer Banks because of, just the overall Atlantic there. We have coastal flood advisory toward our local area. I know, if as busy as we've been, I know probably welcoming that extra hour of sleep here at Saturday night. So you'll see your clock's 1 hour back there. That's a good time to change those smoke alarm batteries. There's no other radio batteries here as well. But we did have some tornado warnings with this accent with this, line that we're tracking now, though. Not really seeing any severe weather at the moment. I wouldn't completely, just because, it happens, even though you maybe wouldn't be really forecast, a quick spin-up tornado warning out here toward Louisiana. You see some rotation around Homa, at least on that view there, a little bit in that vicinity. It wasn't overwhelming, but there was a little bit of that. And then you have, there's a chance maybe a quick damage and wind gust, a roll warning or two, not expecting much. But not impossible there. You have supercell composite bays that still hold on a little bit. Not much in STP with its significant trend parameter. There's instability right at the coast, so that's where you get enough of an overlap right there near the immediate coast. These aren't as high, obviously, as what we had there toward Mexico Beach or anything like that, even Monday morning. But it's still, it's some of that principle kind of continues with some rotational parameters, but then instability closer to the coast there. So that's something we'll watch in case we get something that tries to, maybe make it as, far as our western counties or something a little bit strong. Again, not expecting severe weather. Probably, the Storm Production Center isn't even saying lightning. I wouldn't rule out some lightning strikes. I just don't really see the severe chance. But you never say never. Remember that tornado years ago, probably a decade ago now, give or take around Valdosta. We didn't have, really much of that threat in play at all. Didn't even have any lightning. We had a strong, tornado there, I believe it was. I believe it was an EF2 around Valdosta about 10 years ago or so. So that was, something that just caught everybody off, by surprise. Didn't have a warning until it was already touching. Now I remember, with that, so that, not expecting that. But you always got to expect the unexpected in meteorology, I guess. I'm going to put the forecast model for 10 a.m. on here, Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Central. I know the models weren't even showing this much rain previous. I know the threat for tornado risk, it kind of went, from 0, not to 60 per se, but definitely had went, coming to the view there out toward East Texas, Western Louisiana on Tuesday. Wasn't too bad from, my understanding of the situation, but we did have some tornado warnings popping up here and there. But this is forecast model at 10 a.m. on this Wednesday or Eastern, 11 noon. You see it kind of breaking up even some more. If we get a little more destabilization, this could be tad bit, more packed with some yellows than what it's showing right now. You see there's some reds, popping in there, or at least oranges there right near the coast. If we had a stronger storm, probably like Franklin County area there, something like that within our 62 counties. You see the progression of this pretty weak. This is at 7 p.m. though, so that's, as far as the high res goes out on that latest run. But we're always watching, we're always tracking that there as we're looking at things, I'm just trying to give you guys the very latest on everything. These are our 62 counties we're always watching out for. We're always tracking things. We're watching the national stories, the, global stories with like Melissa, the devastation, obviously, toward Jamaica. Just a tragic, tragic situation there. We're still trying to get a grasp on what happened. We kept the logo red, since everything that had gone down there with that threat toward Mexico Beach Monday morning after the flood and Sunday night. We weren't going to turn it red for Melissa for Jamaica because really, we're more focused on U.S. impacts generally, but we already had it red. It was a situation that is one of the worst in the history of the globe, even if it's not a U.S. impact like Maria was, for instance. That was very bad. It was, though the winds were 30 miles an hour, low is sustained. So it's just going to be in some spots a pile of rubble, probably, sadly, down there toward a part of Jamaica as we look ahead and toward the timeline. Water problems as well, just waterlogged areas from storm surge and or that flooding rainfall. You see some mountains there with that flooding, but and the light. But again, that's our model here locally. Let me take the high res off. Let me go back to some of the satellites here. See our hurricane again, close to making landfall there toward Cuba, not far from Guantanamo Bay anyway. This helps you, with that geographic reference point. But it's pretty close in here. Really, they're definitely getting some nasty weather as we're looking here toward eastern Cuba, unfortunately. As we track things, I have lightning tracker on because it is kind of within the edge of the range now. So you see some of those strikes. I know there was some lightning trackers I couldn't show on our broadcast, but Roy saw the lightning earlier on, better on that eyewall when it was impacting, coming on Jamaica there with the, tragic conditions, obviously. So, just a terrible situation there. Thoughts and prayers go out to them in Jamaica and Cuba and Bahamas and Bermuda and the like. And one thing I noticed, the outer periphery, we talked about how it kind of been impacting the weather squeeze play here with the flooding, high to the north, low to the south, and different boundaries, seeing some different enhancements. But we actually have the outer periphery of the moisture here, the actual view on infrared, right here on, as you look on radar, there's actually been some showers even right there in southeast Florida. Nothing too crazy, but it's just interesting that the periphery actually, just barely scraping there. Really the very outer edge of the tropical envelope directly. So not a big deal at all, but it's just more of a novelty, in this type of scenario. Obviously, this is a terrible hurricane, but just for a U.S. direct kind of sort of impact here, it's just the complete opposite of what they're doing with down in the south. But a few showers here on that very far outer periphery, maybe a little bit of gusty wind. Like, I haven't even looked at velocities in there, but maybe 30 miles an hour or something, not too big of a deal. As we're looking at this, again, I wouldn't be too concerned at all. It's just a kind of an interesting storyline as we're looking at, as we're tracking things here, as we give you guys the very latest here on the overall meteorology, and just to try to keep you guys informed. So, just trying to keep you guys up to date here on everything. Let me go ahead and switch gears here real quick. I do want to mention, as we look toward our area north central Florida, I know as we're looking toward Gainesville there, temperatures right now around 59, and you see parts of Bradford County there 59 degrees, 57 around Jacksonville International Airport. It's pretty chilly, some light jacket weather even. It's going to be, by later on we're going to be talking about maybe heavier jacket weather by like, trick-or-treating time on Halloween night, Friday night there, of course, and Saturday morning, even Thursday night and Friday morning, it's going to be pretty chilly as well. So that's something to definitely be looking out for here as we're watching things. There could even be, in western North Carolina, some of the models are showing just a very tad bit of snow there, the higher elevation. So that's something to kind of look at there as we're kind of watching the overall, weather picture here, as we kind of keep you guys up to date on all of that. I know, coming back on in here, we come toward Gainesville, and I do want to, take note here. There's been so much going on with the weather here lately. But someone who is tracking the weather in toward Gainesville in the 70s and, getting into the 80s there, WTJB broadcaster there on TV 20, WCJB there in Gainesville, a meteorologist there, weather anchor there, Mel Turner passing away at the age of 83 recently, and it's not someone I was too familiar with, but someone that has been talked about over the years, and broadcasted the weather here in North Central Florida decades ago. Had some other jobs here in broadcasting over the years as well, and just want to send my thoughts and prayers out to his family and friends at this difficult time. He passed away in Ocala, according to WCJB there, TV 20. He was 83 years old. As we look here at the picture with Gainesville and Ocala there. But as we go ahead and get back on over to this viewpoint here, make that difficult transition, you do see here some of this rain out toward west central Alabama, southwestern Alabama. Again, if we had anything a little more robust, it'd be down in here. As we're looking at things, trying to give you guys the latest updates here, trying to keep you guys informed. Let me go ahead, though, and talk more about the tropics right now. Obviously, that's been top of mind with what's happened in Jamaica there, and now going toward Cuba. You see Melissa. The next name is Nestor. We had Nestor in Florida in 2019, a late season weaker system, but did produce a tornado in Polk County. It's just, after what we had with Melissa, one of the worst hurricanes ever. It's late in the year. I mean, we're talking about, as you look here, we're kind of starting to go down the track late October. I mean, the patterns don't necessarily generally allow for these type of storms to get this strong, but if they are strong, they would be further south, more maybe Central America, in a similar strength range, not as strong as it was, but, instead, Jamaica there, that island nation getting, just absolutely decimated, parts of it, no doubt, as we continue to watch those reports trickle into tragedy there. As we, continue to give you guys the very latest information on all that. It's just something that is going to be a big storyline as they look ahead. But this goes to so we still have to watch the tropics in November. We had Ada here in 2020, that Greek alphabet name. We had Nicole, that was quite a bit more impactful, 2022. And then, of course, in 1985, we had Hurricane Kate, though. And we'll talk about some of those names here in a moment, in terms of the, worst tropical cyclones for our counties here. Most of those happening earlier on in the season, but Kate an exception. But, kind of reiterate that. As you see, there our 2 a.m. update. I know I've got the track on here, from the 11 p.m. track, because that didn't change. I just got that position on here. But you see it was down to a tropical storm warning in Jamaica on that graphic. Hurricane warning toward parts of eastern Cuba. In the Bahamas, Bermuda, hurricane watch there. As we're looking at things and as we're tracking things, and the winds were 125. So, it's a category 3 hurricane right now. As we're looking at one point, we saw, the number kind of bounce around some with some restrengthening here of the overall setup. I know the earlier update had 130, which would have, I did have it as a Cat 4 at 11 o'clock there with some strengthening after it was 125 at 8, so kind of bouncing around some with these numbers, as it weakened quite a bit, and we started to get that eye back pretty soundly there, and then we saw some of it there, maybe not quite as well formed as we're looking in some ways, but still very volatile situation as we're looking down there toward the Caribbean again. That landfall here going to be soon. As we're looking here, as we're tracking, I know Recon's been out there trying to investigate here again, as I'll go ahead and switch back on over here to our other mode. Let me go ahead and pull this back up. You can kind of see some of the different information. I'll take the wind radii off as we continue to watch Melissa here, and you can see it's a situation where you can see there's where Guantanamo Bay is for reference, just 80 degrees there this late at night. It says you the environment, tropical environment we're in down there, and we actually do have some wind gust readings here out of Guantanamo Bay. So we're talking about 60 knots here. That's a very significant gust there being reported on the METAR here recently. That wind arrow, if you know how to read those, and you can read them like that, but 69 miles an hour is what that's saying. So that's a significant gust here as we're looking toward Guantanamo Bay. Almost a hurricane force gust recently measured there. There's where Guantanamo Bay is. And then here's your hurricane for reference. And We have the overall path here that we're watching, obviously. Some, that northeast type of direction here. I know officially that, they're calling it northeast here at 10 miles an hour. Minimum central pressure was 892, and it hit Jamaica now, 952. Still very, nasty, but not, the historic realm currently. It's a historic storm, that's why we're calling it, that's still, not as historic at this moment, but it's been that. It's going to, we're always going to call it historic because of what it has done toward Jamaica there with the tragedy, with the just harrowing stories to come for folks that did, make it out there, and live to tell about, what happened. But you see the water vapor, the cold cloud tops there, and, upper level moisture don't have visible this time of night. Obviously, the, sun's not out. But, this right here is not a well-defined eye like what we had, but it is an eye that shows up as we're looking and as we're tracking things. And again, watching things in, kind of a relation there to Guantanamo Bay. The center of the eye is about 55 miles west. And then there's, hurricane winds. Well, we're in a situation here where maybe they're, kind of more in the hurricane gust realm right now based on as I look at the wind radii here. But still a nasty experience, but a little bit worse, a little bit further west in Cuba. But it's not, they're not getting off by any stretch. It's still, when we get hurricane gusts around here, give or take, like Irma, that's the one that really comes to mind here. You lose power all over the place, and Helene was just to the west of us here. We're in Bradford and Central Florida, and we didn't have this type here, but just to the west we did, and everybody's losing power. So I don't know how power is different countries, directly, but it's just, when you get those type of hurricane gusts, you're losing power, and that is an issue. So as we continue to look at this, I'll broaden it again. There's Miami for perspective as we're looking here. You see the boundary here that's keeping it away up here. Of course, we had, just the overall situation here. We've been watching things. We've just been tracking them. Obviously here with the overall meteorology, it's just important to kind of be mindful here. Kind of be mindful here what we're dealing with here. It's just kind of so intriguing to see here, and obviously it's such a terrible thing that as we're looking and as we're tracking things, just trying to be very mindful here of what's going on. It's just such a sobering situation here in the meteorology. But again, just continuing to give you guys everything we can. We have these type of situations. I know we have another front in there, so I talk about that tropical envelope, and it's almost as if this front, is, they're not going to change the designation, but when you look at this here, you almost have front involved a little bit closer to the storm system now too. That's kind of interesting with designations and stuff, but this is, it's not quite on it, in it yet. And, that's going to take a while, and it's going to take a while to weaken here in the overall, grand scheme of things as you're watching it, as you're tracking it here. Just kind of interesting here to watch the overall situation meteorologically as you see some of the different aspects of the storm system. It's just kind of interesting. Now, sometimes, front and low pressure and how they, kind of tangle there and the like. So as we go ahead and continue to give you guys the very latest here, let me go ahead and switch back on over toward the graphics again. So in your hurricane, obviously, this just terrible system, Melissa, as we kind of give you guys the very latest here, we're just trying to keep you guys informed on everything. We're just trying to, watch the weather maps here and the like, and let you guys know what's happening. It's just, interesting situation here as we keep on watching everything go on. Let me go ahead and advance this though. Strongest continental U.S. hurricanes. Well, this wasn't a continental U.S. hurricane. Melissa was not, a continental U.S. hurricane, obviously, but just to compare it, landfalling ones here, well, the pressure and the max sustained winds, as of now, I mean, post-analysis will happen, but as of now, those are both tied. They're 185 miles an hour there as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. So that's something that kind of, that's just in the U.S. We've never had anything, in the continental U.S. We've never had anything stronger to hit here in recorded history. Nothing. There's not been a storm stronger, you know, than Melissa. Labor Day was the only one that was, the same here in the U.S. So, the U.S. has not seen, winds any higher based on the numbers that we're seeing right now. Again, these numbers are probably pretty much set in stone. The Melissa numbers could change, could go a little higher based on some of the wind readings, and then you would say that winds, exceeded every U.S. hurricane in all the record books here that, that are being noted here. I mean, I'm sure before modern times we might have had something worse before we had record keeping, obviously. But, just as we're tracking things here, going back 150 years or so, give or take 175 years, something like that. I think it's, you're getting pretty far back in 1800 with some of this record keeping, but, some of it does vary because we started naming names, with the system there's systems there in the Atlantic back in 1950. So, just, and obviously didn't have all the wind measurements and weren't people in some spots. So, you wouldn't know maybe how bad a hurricane was in some of these different areas here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So, again, that background photo, though, if you can kind of tell, that's from Michael. That's Mexico Beach there and the devastation that caused. That's one of the worst tropical cyclones by county in our local area, the 62, going back since the naming of systems in 1950. You see Franklin and McCullough, Liberty and Gadsden, Decatur, Seminole, Miller, Early Calhoun, and Turner in our area. Alberta there, that tropical storm in 94, all that flooding so bad around Albany's why Michael hit in more areas, but both were bad for some of those areas, obviously overlapping different hazards, and that the wind was the worst of Michael. The rain was the big problem, the river flooding, Front River and the like with Alberta. Again, it's not often it's the only tropical storm on here. It's not often you see a tropical storm in a graphic like this. You see Kate there. That's what we were alluding to. That's one that, all these others hit in the calendar earlier on than where we're at. But Kate, actually, the worst tropical cyclone for areas like Leon, Grady, Thomas, Colquitt, and Tip, that was actually later in the calendar. You're still, getting pretty far into November, so you still got to remain alert. Is the point. Not that we see anything right off right now, but just, don't let your guard down in case something were to develop. If it did, it'd be more likely it'd be a kind of a hybrid because we're cooling off some, but it, could warm back up, Kate. We got cooled off some looking back at 85, and then we warmed back up there, and then we had the hurricane, powerful storm system come across the Cat 2, I believe it was, and just at landfall anyway, and that's, just something that's, really, significant for mid to late November, but the war's on here, obviously, so big of a deal around Jacksonville and Stark and St. Augustine there, and as we go ahead, though, and see that rainfall forecast next 7 days, you see that tropical envelope there as we look toward the Bahamas there, all that precip out there locally. Even though some areas have had flooding towards central Florida, I mean, the forecast models did not pick up on that very well at all because they didn't really, see, maybe Melissa there, how it was influencing the squeeze play there, and the meteorology was kind of an odd setup. Odd situation, but we're not expecting a whole bunch of rain next 7 days. Some areas still need it, some areas are still in drought though, despite all that flooding to the south. You can see here though, 10th quarter inch, something like that. As we're looking, some areas even only getting between 100th and a 10th here on average. Southwest Florida and the northwestern areas of that, maybe closer to Clinton County, could get closer to half inch and the like, but really, yeah, not something that's really too big of a deal in terms of rainfall numbers. We actually, again, could use more rain because if we don't get the rain, some areas have flooded to the south. It's weird seeing that, and a tornado to the west. We really do need rain or we're going to have problems, with the drought. Yeah, if we don't get precip, but there could be waves of that based on some of the forecast models, we'll just have to watch out then for lightning and then more severe weather. Then it's not always a positive, but we do need precip somehow here, just not too much too quick like what they got in Central Florida. They didn't need it as much, and they got the adverse flooding, so much rain so quick. Their Lake and Brevard counties especially. As we see, real quick college football playoff though, my top 12. I know it's been so busy. We updated this here I did the other day. Had it in here, and I'm not going to spend as much time as I normally do on here, but with everything going on in the weather world, the logo red and the like. But Ohio State, Indiana seem to be, those two front runners by far in the Big Ten. Texas A&M, the undefeated squad in the SEC, they destroyed, in terms of that, the game outcome. LSU Saturday night there, in terms of, the margin of victory. And then as you look there toward Alabama and Georgia there, they, one loss teams looking pretty good. And then, Georgia Tech there, the ACC champion right now in my assessment. What a great job by Haynes Keene there. And the like, you see BYU there, head coach Kalani Sitake there. He's been there a while, bringing stability to that program and doing a great job. And Miami there, well, they really pulled away by a wide margin against Stanford. I jumped them over Texas Tech. Texas Tech had their backup in there. You'd got hurt, but they took care of business against Oklahoma State. But Miami, beat a Stanford team that beat FSU. They beat them by a wide margin. They bounced back. That's something they don't always do after a loss like they did have against Louisville recently. And then Oregon, I'm not sure about them. They had some quarterback issues with injury, and I'm not sure. We'll see. They barely beat Penn State, who, obviously wasn't as good as we thought there. And then Ole Miss there. I know sometimes when you say not as good, I mean Penn State, some of their losses there. Well, all three of them, going into the, game, after the head coach, was let go there, James Franklin. Their losses were close there, but I think the one after was too. But Ole Miss there, 11th. I don't think they're as impressive as other people think, but I did have to put them in right now for Notre Dame. They only have the one loss there, as we're looking at her, and just tracking things here in the overall picture. It's just, it's late, and this is not something I looked at quite as much lately because I've been so busy with the weather now. But hadn't this ready, so I thought I'd show up ahead at losses to Georgia. I almost wanted to say they're undefeated, but no, they lost to Georgia there. And that's something that weighs pretty heavily here in this. And the Navy here, right now they're an undefeated team. They not look like it in a way in terms of just margin of victory, but they're undefeated, so they're most deserving right now, and I think that's more important. People used that against FSU in 23. They said they were the most deserving, but they did not actually earn it because they just didn't pass the eye test there. But I like to use most deserving here when you can. And then Notre Dame's first team out, but they're if they went out, they'll be in. You got to think, and then Virginia there, Louisville. Those teams. I think they're better. Vandy, I'm just not sure yet. I know they only had that one loss there to Alabama, but just not sure about them yet. Cincinnati, Houston, they're doing well in the Big 12 there. They moved from the American Conference to the Big 12, and they're doing well. Both of them just one loss, on the season. As you go ahead and look here at that next 7 days, 40% chance of rain on this Wednesday here. That's higher than what some folks have. It's just going to be a short-term period if we get it, and when we get it in spot, probably. Less chance on Thursday. Look how cool some of these lows are. 48 Thursday morning, 43 Halloween Friday morning, 41 Saturday. But some spots could be in the upper 30s even. Maybe even Friday morning, but especially Saturday morning. Sometimes, we have in these cool patterns, we have wind at points, but when you don't have the wind, when it dies down, that can help things cool off more. Really get chilly in those rural areas, but you see it bounces back quick. Rain chances kind of uncertain. The models are kind of, showing one thing. Some of them are, with more rain. Others aren't showing much. If we did get more rain, it could end up being a severe threat, even especially if the temperatures get up there. So we'll have to watch for that, as those, potentially could get, above average even just a little bit with those highs toward early next week. But it's too early to put that on the graphic yet. But we'll have to watch for that. And again, not expecting severe weather here today, though. On your Wednesday, not expecting really even a strong storm. But I do think there could be some lightning, rogue lightning here and there. We do need rain. Not going to get much out of it, though, here locally. As you get toward Halloween Friday, not really expecting rain. but cool air. That's the story. There's kids here going trick-or-treating, make sure they're bundled up, not, just in like mini layers, but have that light jacket on at least, if not something like a, moderate to almost, some folks, depending on how long they're out, they might almost want a heavy jacket, but you see, bouncing back with the highs Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday into the 70s there, but those lows take a little longer because it goes from drier to bigger contrast to closer temperatures, a smaller contrast here. So again, as we're kind of looking at things, as we're tracking things here, I think that pretty much wraps it up. It's been a long day. We were on for a while. Early Tuesday, there in the afternoon, late morning. We were on Monday with the stuff toward Mexico Beach there. We were on Sunday night there as well with the flood in Central Florida. Plus an update on Melissa, historic Melissa. If we need to cut back in before late Thursday, we will, but otherwise we'll be back on late Thursday with more weather information. So I want to give you a formal update Thursday tonight. Again, we've been looking at some of these areas in the Caribbean, obviously, and we've been looking at, Melissa at landfall. They'll probably call it soon. I haven't seen an update come in yet. Here they may, very well send out a special statement when that happens, though. They call that landfall about a Cat 3 hurricane there, hitting Guantanamo Bay. Is not in the very worst, but they're in pretty bad, conditions here, nasty conditions there for sure. Again, there's that wind scale to kind of reiterate that here as we're looking and as we're tracking things right now. Still a devastating situation around that eye wall with the wind. The rainfall still can be a big threat with flash flooding, but it's moving quicker. But that surge can be an issue too. Guantanamo Bay area, for instance, they're in the favorable slot for that. So that's something we got to watch out for here as we're looking at things. You can kind of see some of these winds. We have them as overlays now, and some of these winds, depending on the angle, but and the spots, you can kind of get that water to funnel on in more. Some of them more, if they're more right to left, and depending on how things are oriented, the water might come in like a spot, like right here, for instance. That water is going to come up in spots there as we're looking, and then you even have around Guantanamo Bay, some of that water will be, probably getting funneled in, depending on how the local topography is. I really don't know, but as you're looking here, because it's not the U.S., but really, I mean, technically, Guantanamo Bay, there's U.S. interest, but it's not the continental U.S. that I'm used to talking about here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. But that's kind of storyline here. I should pretty much wrap it up here for tonight. Just keeping everybody impacted in my thoughts and prayers here as we look at historic Melissa. A Cat 3 right now, was a Cat 5. As we, have been looking at things here with the meteorology, again, that landfall, that, eye about to have that center across there with, the lowest pressure, and then the lowest pressure crossing would designate another landfall. That's about to happen here soon with that eye wall impacting folks there in the ward parts of southern Cuba as we speak there. So that's going to wrap it on up here for tonight, though. I appreciate everybody tuning in, trusting me here as we keep on watching this weather situation. I know, for that FSU homecoming weekend, I know we're looking at Melissa, but, for our local area, for FSU homecoming, the weather looks nice, just a little cool, as we're getting over there. And then for that big game in Jacksonville, haven't had a chance to see if it's Georgia, Florida this year, or Florida, Georgia, but, that's a big game, obviously. Even, it's just, Georgia in the running for the playoff there. And the like, but it's a big game, and the weather looks pretty good for that as well. Again, maybe a little bit cool, in some way. This is more in the afternoon now than the FSU homecoming game. This at night. The parade's Friday afternoon now for FSU. So as you're looking at things and as you're tracking things, and then that's when you have a little bit more of that sunshine there. Obviously, that would be a little bit more helpful there. Obviously, in terms of making things feel a little bit nicer, but. That homecoming game Saturday night at Doak Campbell Stadium, definitely need that jacket there. Doak Campbell Stadium at Papa Bowden Field. So, again, Melissa, though, top of mind here as we're looking, as we're tracking. We'll be back here late Thursday, unless we need to pop back in earlier, though, as we're continuing to give you guys the latest. Have a great night, everybody. Stay safe. And again, we're going to continue to watch the tropics and keep everybody impacted. Keep them in my thoughts and prayers.